Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. Well, what does the practice of a safety expert mean to an organization that employs him or her? It means everything. If they do the job very well and figure out how to help everyone else in the organization attend to safety all the time, anytime, anywhere. And that's what Jordan Wareham does for Spirit Airlines. He loves it. He loves this practice. It's relatively new in the lineage of his career, having once been a pilot and then for years trained pilots and developed safety programs more recently. But nearly a year at Spirit, you'll hear how much Jordan cares about every aspect of this business and sees it on human terms that are so impressive. And further, he's been studying organization development and change at Bowling Green State University, and you can tell how his advanced study in organization and change writ large reinforces and deepens what he does with safety. So rather than tell you everything I heard and learned, why don't you listen and see what you think about this extraordinarily gifted practitioner, Jordan Wareham. Well, folks, if you've been following the series, and I hope you have, you know that several people that I've had recorded conversations with are affiliated with Bowling Green State University and their organization and development and change doctoral program and master's programs, one of whom is Carol Gorlick. And the other day, Carol, who I meet with regularly because we have so many interests in common, said, "Oh, you really, really need to have a conversation with Jordan Wareham. He's really knows what we're about, but he also has an extraordinarily interesting practice." And so welcome, Jordan, on behalf of Carol and me. It's great to have this opportunity. Your practice is, I recall in our first introduction, safety, airline safety in particular. And there's a lot that goes into that. So why don't you tell me a bit more about what it means to you to carry that tremendous responsibility on your shoulders?
Well, thanks, Dave, and I appreciate Carol immensely for connecting us. I like to say that, I don't necessarily carry it on my own shoulders because safety is a thing that everyone is responsible for, and so we all carry it on our shoulders.
I agree.
So, from that perspective, I don't necessarily feel like it's all on me, but I am privileged to at least lead our culture and policy and processes and be responsible for those things to facilitate everyone else's ability to lead within our safety culture. So maybe that's the way I like to think about it.
Well, I think that way of thinking about it indicates that the organization development and change perspective that you've invested in enriches and reinforces what safety means to you. And I did want to mention that you're with Spirit Airlines, so that those of us who fly on Spirit will be very happy to know that you're working on every level with people, because a lot of safety, maybe most of safety, as far as I could see, has to do with human concentration and doing things the right way. So that's great. How long have you had this role as Chief Safety Officer?
Yeah, so I've been the director of safety since about June of last year, so a year and a few months. but I'm certainly not new to the airline industry. Believe it or not, my predominantly my history, my practice has been in training. So I
Aha.
spent almost 20 years in pilot training and commercial pilot training. And so safety for me, it's interesting because I always, for many, many years, worked with the safety department, but I never worked in the safety department.
Yeah.
Uh, I was either a stakeholder or in some ways a customer of the safety department. And the safety department really is the wing of the airline that holds accountability. And so certainly I was held accountable by people in the safety department. But yeah, so I've been in aviation and commercial aviation, specifically airline related aviation, since about 2004. And
Wow.
I was a pilot myself, and I flew commercially for a little airline up in Minnesota called Mesaba Airlines. It was part of the Northwest Airlink system
Hmm.
that then flowed into Delta Airlines. And during that time, I was part of the training department, and I oversaw the training on the Canada Regional Jet Series. And then I worked for many years overseeing commercial training programs on behalf of a for-profit training provider in Toronto, Canada, and then Phoenix. And then ultimately, my last stop before arriving at Spirit, I was so privileged to spend 3 amazing years working in human factors, crew resource management, leadership, and then ultimately led the pilot training department at Hawaiian Airlines out in Honolulu. And
Wow.
yeah, and that's
It's a long
where
way
I
from
was.
Minnesota, huh?
It is a little bit from Minnesota. So that's where I was for the 3 years before coming to Spirit. I've been with Spirit almost a year and a half now, and have been the director of safety since June of last year.
Do you see going forward a lot more runway for the work you want to do in the industry?
I
Because you've
mean,
done a lot in a relatively short period of time.
yeah, I certainly do. I see a lot of opportunity for, especially for organization development and change practices to come into aviation. You know, I think it's really common that inside of aviation, we do a pretty good job of learning from each other. Where we have opportunity is to learn from disciplines that are outside aviation and bring
Yeah,
those skills of practice into, you know, how we do our work.
right.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. In fact, I'm talking right now with the FAA about changing their entire methodology for how they accomplish one of their largest information sharing conferences through the use of open space technology.
There you
Uh,
go.
and I've partnered with Peggy Holman to do that. And so that's been extraordinary because as I have taken part with the program at Bowling Green and have started being introduced to some of the OD tools, it has really allowed me to understand where and how these might be used inside of aviation to, you know, not only improve our operation, but really support safety overall, not only within my airline, but the entire airline industry. That I've been able to connect key people with these things, and it looks like we're on the path towards adoption. So that's really very cool.
So that will foster change with a very different conversational practice, if you will. When that conference has been held over years, it probably locks into a pretty standard way, you know, panels and audiences.
That's
And
right.
my hunch is that you've seen the value of breaking some of that out and giving people a chance to do a lot of crosstalk and a lot of sharing and issue focuses, but really giving people a chance to be engaged in them. Is that somewhat your vision for the FAA?
I think that's right. I mean, I think the FAA is a great partner because they definitely are prioritizing safety for the greater traveling public. I mean, that is
Yeah.
their mandate.
Yes.
Um, and and recently they issued a call to action, and this is all very public. This is all very public. After some operational incidents, they issued a call to action, and they brought all the airlines together. And I think it's fair to say that that interaction happened in a more traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I was watching that interaction go down, where the intention of the FAA was phenomenal in terms of, hey, we want to hear from industry, we want to collaborate, we want to share, information with each other in a way that we can, improve the overall system. I'm not always sure that the methodologies used are best suited for that. And so it struck me as a great open space moment, and I approached their leadership, and they've been very open to it. So what
That's
that means,
exciting.
it is exciting. So what that means to me is there is so much good that organization development and change practices can make within every single industry. And I like to say a rising tide lifts all boats. And to me, the ultimate purpose of OD&C is to lift all the boats together. So that's really why I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. I've taught the O for over 50 years, the organization, because way back, even before I met Peter Vail for my doctoral program, I had maybe even more than an instinct about how significant it is when people organize to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those organizations have very high missions, like the one you've just described with FAA. And some of them are temporary, and some of them, the members intend it for them to last, but they don't. Either external or internal factors, or both, kind of dissolve organizations. So I think one of the great reasons that OD&C is a very compatible way of thinking and discipline and body of knowledge is that in your cases, in many cases, you're going to be working in and on an organization in order for things to hold together and to get better. So there's always an O in the picture. Now, development, of course, is what you're also doing internally with your various department teams, and externally by putting your leadership out there to a huge federal agency and getting initially some really good responses. That's great. And then the C, change. When I taught leadership and management for years, initially and then throughout, we said there's really hardly any reason to have managerial positions other than continuity, but there's never a way you can do without leadership, because it's always about change. This is something Peter Vail wrote, we put in our conjectures. It's always about change. So you have to find, when change is happening, the people within your system who are closest to that change as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to make sure there's no impediments to them being able to voice without retribution what they see. So now I'm back in your court. That's to me, that C, which has got to be constant in airline work, is a real beacon, if you will, for your imagination and your intellect.
Yeah. So what's interesting about airlines is if we were really doing our job well, and I believe we do in many regards, we would be listening to the front line. So the change would actually be originated from the individuals in the operation. And if I think back to, you may have heard some organizations refer to themselves or refer to a particular industry as high reliable organizations or high reliability organizations.
Absolutely.
And certainly an airline should and would fit within that category. But one of the tenets of a highly reliable organization, and I should mention there is some philosophical discussion right now about whether or not it is truly an HRO in terms of, does that exist, or really is it the principles that underpin an HRO that then create reliability, which is kind of similar to a discussion I have around safety, whether safety is a value or if safety is an outcome. Yeah. But one of the principles of achieving high reliability is that you're listening consistently to your front line. Yeah. And that you've created a channel of feedback. So if I think back to my days at Hawaiian, I actually was in charge of the operations manual. It's not common for the training person to own the operations manual, but in my case, I did. And one of the things that we did there, which was very, very interesting, is we put a QR code in the front of our manual.
Ah,
And we basically said, if you have any feedback or recommendations for change, or if you have any recommendations, of a procedure that may not be working well, or if you think there's something in the manual that simply isn't addressed and you need further guidance or it needs to be clarified, whatever you need, send us your message on this QR code. It had never been done before.
I think it's brilliant. Did they use it?
We did all the time we did. And what really, when it really started to take traction was when we would start to put out manual revisions and people could see that the material that had been revised was directly related to
you
absolutely should be involving the stakeholders if you're doing top-down change. But in an organization like mine, where those of us in headquarters, it is certainly possible for us to be a little bit disconnected from the operation because we're not in it every single day. So the people that need to be pointing out what needs to change are those that are inside the operation.
Yeah.
That have that front row seat. And I think that's part of, if I think back to kind of leadership principles, I think that's definitely kind of one of those tenets of servant leadership, where, hey, how am I listening and serving to the front line in a way that's making a meaningful difference? If I just want to pretend as a senior leader that I have first of all have a full view of all the problems, I'm absolutely
that now it's back on your shoulders. It's really on your neck. If you
that's right.
I mean, you'd be crazy to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know people do, not necessarily with responsibility for the safety of flights, but who think, I think I've got it. I don't need to hear anymore. And then we read about that in the press, And
I think it's just human nature, exactly. And then what I love is that oftentimes the people that are closest to the problem are often closest to the solution, or closest to the opportunity. And so, I think that's a really important thing for any organization that is safety critical to ensure that you're listening to that front line and making sure they're a part of your overall feedback cycle.
Another thing of many that I've already learned about you and your role is that you mentioned that you bring in other disciplines. Therefore, safety isn't a singular, this is it, and everything else is something else. You want to develop mixes of what does create reliability. And in that regard, I think of the study I've done over decades of the quality management movement. I focused on Joseph Juran, but there are numbers. But basically, what a Juran or any other well-organized methodology for quality, you don't want to reinvent that wheel. It's a tremendously thought out and well-proved system. So you maybe pick this and that and see what works. But if the better you can work on your quality assurances and all the rest of the things about quality, that works. And then there are other disciplines I am guessing that you would be bringing in to the picture. What, for example, are you doing with that quality discipline?
Well, it's funny you ask that because I largely oversee our quality program at the airline, the overall corporate program for quality. And the way we have it is each one of our operational divisions. So if you know how an airline is structured, we have divisions that oversee very specific areas. So we have the flight division, which oversees the pilots. We have the in-flight, which oversees flight attendants. We have technical operations, which oversees maintenance. Airport operations, which oversees what happens, at the airport in terms of aircraft servicing, but also our passenger handling, or as we like to call it at Spirit, our guest experience. And so over each one of those areas, we have individuals who are accomplishing quality processes within that. Yeah. And it typically can look like either ongoing performance auditing, or in the case of our tech ops maintenance group, it can also be reliability monitoring. And so what they'll do is they'll set reliability targets. And then if we're for some reason not hitting those reliability targets, looking into those things more deeply. But then
Yeah.
what we've done is we've established a system by where if we see one of three things starting to pop up in our quality data, so if we see a negative trend over time, something that is systemic, or something that we consider to be critical to the safety of flight, that actually gets elevated out of our quality data and comes up into our safety management system data.
Right. Right.
Okay? And in some ways, it replicates the same intent, because the quality system is also meant to provide correction, to provide accountability and correction into the system. But what bringing it up into the safety management system does is increases the visibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we will actually do at that point is we will do what's called a safety risk assessment against what we're finding in the quality data to determine how at risk we are in terms of severity, but also how at risk we are in terms of probability. And then we will make calculated decisions based upon those things as to how we're going to mitigate that risk down to one that we're willing to accept as a company, with always the understanding that it is always our intention to mitigate that risk down to as low as reasonably possible. We call it the ALARP concept.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that. Yeah.
Now we have to realize that flying involves risk. If we wanted to have a zero risk airline, we'd have to park airplanes, shut them off, and walk away. Right? But it
ruins the customer experience.
It does. It doesn't quite get you to Cleveland when you want to go there, But so there is risk in flying, just like in driving your car, just like in walking across the street, right?
Sure.
So what we do is we focus on that as low as reasonably possible, the ALARP concept, to say, as a manager, and I'm talking in the broader sense, I have a responsibility to first never introduce anything into the operation that would bring with it a hazardous result. Yeah. But B, really to actively monitor what's going on inside of my operation so that I can identify hazards and associated risk, and then use the tools that I have to mitigate that risk to where it's either removed completely, which in some cases we can do that, or in the event that we're unable to eliminate the risk completely, that we mitigate that to the lowest possible extent. Because if you think about it, an airline's entire future is based on its safety performance.
That's right.
Its safety performance is closely tied to its brand awareness. It's closely tied to consumer confidence in that airline. And if an airline has an unfortunate accident, that can actually stick with them for many, many years and impact how that airline is perceived and seen, right?
I know.
So it is as much and the most important thing is, how do we keep our guests and our employees safe? Like, I want everybody going home at the end of the day as they came to work, right? And with the ability to go home, provide for their family safely, be injury-free, all of those things. Same with our guests. I want our guests to be able to ride every single Spirit flight and go home at the end of the day loving their experience and feeling well taken care of, and that they got safely to their destination. And so really it's important for their own safety, but it's also important for the organization. And you can't lose sight of those two things because they're intrinsically linked.
You have what we call strategic contingency in your role. And because I can't imagine anyone who is in the larger senior team of your company ignoring you. If they hear from you, they're going to listen. And so you're at this about a year. How have you been able to develop the rapport and the trust so that if they hear from Jordan that something is bubbling up from the front line, they stop everything and listen?
No, that's a great question, because I think that is one of the biggest ways a safety leader can become ineffective in a moment if they're not very judicious, but also disciplined in their communication style.
Right.
Because
you don't want to run up there with every little thing. What you're trying to do is develop what's strategic so that you can use their time and talent much more effectively.
Yes, and it's not that they're not interested in the little things, but what they're, I find as we go up in levels of leadership, what I need to use that level of leadership for is to devote resources to holistically solve the root causes.
Yes.
Okay. And so what I have to do is a couple things is I have to step back and I have to go, okay, well, here are the indicators. The indicators are the events or the issues that we're having. But I need to step back and really do a good job of understanding what's driving this.
Right.
And so really when I'm going to the senior leadership team, it is probably again out of one of those three areas. Do I have something that's systemic that's impacting our safety or performance to a point where I'm not comfortable? Do I have something that is negative trend over time? Or do I have something that's immediately impacting the safety critical of flight? If I feel like it hits one of those things and it's at a cross-divisional level, and that the operational division is working to solve, meaning it's the answer is not just clearly within any one particular division, then that's usually the things that we go up and talk about. But it's at the end of the day, it's all about, trust and relationship currency. And so what do? You have to be evidence-based. What you bring forward has to be backed up by the data. And then you're very selective in terms of, okay, what am I bringing things forward? How am I bringing things forward in a way that, is supporting a solution that we need for the operation? Does that make sense?
It sure does. I mean, yeah, don't just tell me the problem. Give me a start on the solution at any level. If someone reports their first observation is, something's not quite right, well, that's an alarm. But if you develop, as you have as a trainer, their deeper responsibility is to go deep, gather, be more mindful that there's something that's causing it. And if it's not immediately urgent to get the message up, spend a little time and do some research and come up with something that's workable. And that can then make your job ultimately the last touch before it goes to the senior decision makers.
Yeah, and
you're really in the catbird seat, man.
but what I should say is this is I have not once had to go to my senior leadership team and talk about a challenge or problem that we were not actively engaged on, probably at the vice president level. And why?
Yeah.
And so really, more important than my ability to go to the CEO or the COO or the senior leadership team is my ability to work across the divisions at the vice president level and engage the necessary people, broker relationships and broker opportunities at that level and below. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, as a director of safety, you have to know who you can talk to about what issue. You have to be able to jump in and work with individuals up, down, across the organization to solve issues. And if you're willing to kind of jump in the trenches with people to solve it, it works out really, really well. And you develop great partnerships. And so what that turns into really is, as you go and brief to the vice presidents and brief to the senior leadership team, is it sounds a bit like, hey, here's what we were seeing. I've engaged these people. Here's what we're doing about it. And it seems to be working out.
That sounds like very good news. I'm just really impressed, Jordan, because I mentioned already, I spent a lot of years teaching about organization and organizational leadership. I've brought in as many of the disciplines that I found over the years that it would be important for my students to learn as generalists. And in every case, and this is Peter Vail saying this through me, it does have to do with how, even the word excited isn't the right word, fully invested in a healthy way any particular leader is in the overall results of the organization and not just the ones that they can achieve alone. And you have that sense. I get the feeling listening to you that your Spirit Airlines in your head, and everything that works and doesn't work, you get a sense of, and you have a lot of confidence in the organization relationships that you can work through, so that you have a lot of good days.
Yeah, what I love about Spirit is we have a really high degree of commitment to safety across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts from the top and it goes all the way down through each individual. And so really it's that commitment that makes these conversations easy.
Yeah.
And I always say that commitment is the internal motivation, compliance is the external motivation, because from compliance comes, if I'm operating from a context of compliance, I'm operating out of context of not wanting to receive punishment through enforcement action.
It's very much fear-based.
That's right. But if I'm operating in accordance with commitment, now I'm doing the right things because it's the right way to do it, and we're moving the organization forward through that commitment, through that choice to the highest safety principles possible. And I have to say, across the board in Spirit Airlines, that we have that at every level of the organization. And so that's why, I feel very good that when I'm needing to partner up in the organization, I don't say manage up, I say partner up in the organization.
I hear you.
Right? That whoever I come to bring a concern is going to take it seriously, and we're going to sit down and work through it. And they know that, I'm coming to them with, like I said, data and sincerity, and I'm not operating from a blame context. I'm operating from a collaborative context, because really I'm here to agree to the same outcome that we both want, which is to ensure that we're running the safest operation possible, right? And so when you come into these conversations from that perspective and with that spirit, then I find you get really willing partners, and the individuals who are there to devote the time, the energy, and the resources, or to direct the resources, time, and energy, are very much willing to do that. And I've seen across the board, all the way up to our CEO, where everybody is very, very willing to partner in safety to ensure that we have, the highest outcomes. So,
wow. So that gives you good reason to come home, as you have tonight, for this conversation, with still a bunch of energy on reserve. You're not whipped and burnt and discouraged at all. You're just the opposite. So the practice that you've developed now as a prime safety resource and leader within the company seems to suit you very well, and the company itself suits your practice. You're not in a place where, as you said many times now, safety is, we always look at safety, but their eye is on some other prize, profit or expansion or whatever else seems to move the cheese. But in this case, you're in the right place at the right time, and it shows. And I have one more question, as our time budget is pretty much up. Why did you choose, in addition to all the other things you took on, to go for an advanced degree?
Okay. No, that's an interesting question.
Is that what your family asked you, or is that...
No, they were not asking for it. I have 3 small children, so it comes at a cost, I can assure you. I will give you that answer. Let me just quickly say, though, there are still hard days at Spirit Airlines, and what I find in those moments, though, and this is something that I routinely tell all of my colleagues, is you have a choice in life to either focus on the mission or focus on the misery. And if you keep the mission over the misery, then you remain engaged, you remain passionate about what you're doing. The second that you lose sight of the mission and you instead focus on the misery, you're in trouble.
That's a great point.
So for me, even on the hard days when we don't feel like we're pushing things forward as fast as we'd like, and there are those days at every organization. To me, it's mission over misery, and that's what supports my ability to move forward. You asked about the degree. Wow, that's a definite mission over misery story.
Of course.
Yeah. First of all, education is something that my family as a whole values very much. Both of my parents were college professors. My grandfather was a heart surgeon. My dad is a lawyer. So education and pursuing terminal degrees is just kind of part of the DNA of our family a little bit.
I get it.
Yeah, and so I value that and have always kind of wanted to do it. But why OD&C? Well, I think that my master's was in organization performance improvement and workplace learning.
Mhm.
And to me, this is a very, very complementary and supporting direction. And what I
Definitely.
love about this is it's still in the business of performance improvement and problem solving, but it's doing it from a participation space. And it's doing it from a appreciative space. And it's doing it from a imagining possibilities and opportunity space.
Yes.
And what I find is when you're trying to do the work inside the organization, and people are so often focusing on that misery, the ability to pull them out of that focus and attach them to a higher mission that you can then activate to get people to imagine the possibility of the opportunity is an important skill.
It sure is. And you'll never find a place that doesn't need that.
Yeah.
So I think, but I think you're in the right, definitely in your track record in the airline industry is speaks volumes. And I just hope you're around for many more years, however you want to play a role in the airline industry, because I might get on one of your planes someday.
Well, I hope you will, because Spirit Airlines is a fantastic airline. I could not be prouder to work for them.
Yeah.
And I love who we are. I mean, I like to even say that Spirit Airlines is the operational development and change airline of the world. Why do I say that? Because we are really in it to allow for kids to see grandparents. We're an ultra low cost carrier. So we let families go do things that no other that they couldn't have done otherwise on another airline because of our price structure and all of those things. So I say,
and the routes that you choose. Yeah,
that's right. And I say, hey, we let families go on vacation and we let kids go see their grandparents. And I'm so proud of that. Every time I go flying, I meet people who are first-time flyers, and these are people that are not young people sometimes. And so sometimes Spirit is the one that has given them the opportunity. Maybe it's because, our fares are cheaper or where we fly, to be able to experience something they've never experienced before, and to be able to be part of an organization and support our ability to do that safely is super exciting. So I love that's why we're here, and the purpose we serve in the industry, and we'll see where things take us.
Jordan Wareham, this has been wonderful. I can't thank you enough. I will thank you anyway. I really enjoyed this, and I've learned a great deal, and I think our listeners will too.
Well, good. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And maybe I can join you again sometime in the future. I don't know if you have return guests, but always love a good conversation.
I love that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book on practice as a way of being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vale and I originated it several years ago. So please come to mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.